maybe it's only 5 or 10 jobs, but those might be 5 jobs that have been around for 2 decades and have significant meaning and impact in a small region, in families and communities. And so,
What's going on, everybody? Welcome into the Highlight, a business podcast for business people. And today I'm joined by a new friend in my new hometown of Cincinnati, Ohio. And we should have just done this locally, Tim, but here we are doing the internet thing like everybody does these days. I'm joined today by my friend Tim Metzner. He is the founder and CEO of Fireroad. And I got to tell you, this podcast is for $1 to $10 million business owners. And Tim and I were talking about that right before we jumped on the show. And I can't tell you how many people I know in that space that have all kind of feelings, both positive and negative, when it comes to venture capital, when it comes to bringing on investors, when it comes to bootstrapping versus bringing on partners, solopreneurs versus having a whole bunch of employees. And I'm excited to have Tim on today because this guy has a ton of experience in all those different spaces. Tim, welcome to the show, man. Thanks for joining me.
yeah, thanks, Chandler. Great to be here. I almost forgot you were in Cincinnati, actually. It would have been great to actually meet in person. We'll do that at some point.
I'm in the middle of sourcing a couple different spaces. There's a few people in the area that are doing some local podcast studio type things. And
Cool.
as much as I'd love to have you in my unfinished basement here, I will wait until we do something a little more. But part
Fair
two,
enough.
we'll do in person then. How about that? And
Looking
technically,
forward
I'm
to
in
it.
Northern Kentucky, which I'm learning in Cincinnati is a faux pas to say. It's not actually Cincinnati that I live in, it's Northern Kentucky. And I'm like, guys, nobody outside of this city knows or cares.
It's
So
one
let's just.
region. Where's our airport? It's actually in
That's
northern
right.
Kentucky. So
That's
yeah,
right.
it's part of the
CVG. Yep,
region.
that's right.
Yeah.
It's like 10 minutes from my house, and when the weather's bad, the planes somehow fly right over. And somehow I missed that in the onboarding process for this house, but here we are. Well, I'd love to talk Cincinnati with you for the next hour, but I don't know if that'd be very helpful for all our guests. So I'll try to
That's
stay
right.
disciplined and in line. I'd
Yeah.
love to hear more about Fire Road, man, and how you started it and who you started it with and why, more importantly, you ended up going down that road versus anything else.
Yeah, that's kind of a winding story in the because it really is this like culmination of a lot of different things I've been a part of. As you sort of mentioned earlier on, my entrepreneurial journey has been winding, like serial co-founder, been a part of services business and venture-backed businesses and nonprofits and all kinds of things. And as I learned and reflected and grew, a number of different problems kept jumping out at me that I wanted to jump into. So one of those was on the early stage software startup side. So think venture backed businesses, who are trying to go to call it $1 billion valuation. There's not a whole lot of track record of companies like that being built in Cincinnati, and even fewer investors who have experience doing that and an appetite to do that. And so, as a co founder of a couple of those and as a mentor to many more, I've personally experienced how challenging it can be to raise early stage capital, like the earliest, riskiest, first capital in the door. Very, very challenging to find folks in our region, called the Midwest broadly, willing to write those checks. Even more rare to find folks willing to write those checks who actually have been a founder first, like who've been in the seat and are able, willing, and excited to be an investor and a mentor and a guide. And I've just personally believed that pre-seed and seed stage investing is not passive. Like it should be very active, very hands-on. Like this is hand-to-hand combat. You're in the trenches. And so having done this for a while now and experienced how challenging that is, myself and a few other folks, so Rye Walker, who we've built some businesses together, both sort of said, if we ever get an opportunity, like let's be the investor that we wish we had, when we were getting started. So that's Fire Road Ventures, leg one of what we're doing in the kind of across the whole Fire Road platform. The second is more focused on small business ownership, small business owners, and let's call it just jobs in general. So I've long had a heart for small business owners, and over the last decade became very well aware of this. Today it's being described as the silver tsunami. It's a little bit of a buzzword for sure, but the reality is more than half of the jobs in America are in small businesses. Um, Most of those businesses are now being run by owners who are 55 years or older, and few of those owners actually have a succession plan in place. And so when you put all those things together, while a lot of people talk about this wealth transfer and the money to be had there, like absolutely that's real. The thing that breaks my heart is thinking about a huge number of jobs, especially if you think about more rural, small town communities. Like if those businesses don't transition, maybe it's only 5 or 10 jobs, but those might be 5 jobs that have been around for 2 decades and have significant meaning and impact in a small region, in families and communities. And so that idea that we have a lot of businesses that may struggle to transition well, that could lead to a lot of jobs going away, those impact families and communities immensely. And when you put them together, equates to a pretty large problem and challenge I think we might face in the next couple of decades if we don't have more companies like Fireroad saying we want to step in the gap here and help transition businesses and come alongside owners in a way that, unlike private equity, is not just focused on bottom line impact, but is actually focused on community and employee and customer impact. And so that's this building a holding company focused on those types of businesses on the other side of Fireroad is what we're trying to do. And those, like I said, are two problems and things I've thought about for quite a bit of time. And even more personally, so I talked about how I personally experienced the challenge of raising capital. On the holdco side, a handful of years ago, I actually personally experienced the challenge of a small business not transitioning. So my father-in-law was a second generation business owner. His father, my wife's great grandfather, started a business called Cincinnati Ice, and they distributed ice machines initially, is what that company did. Eventually, my father-in-law stepped in with his brothers and they scaled it to restaurant equipment distribution and built a really nice business here in the Cincinnati region, and decided a bunch of years ago they weren't going to bring Gen 3 into that business. And despite the fact that more than a decade ago I tried to have the conversation about succession planning, like they wouldn't have that conversation. And through the COVID craziness, unfortunately, my father-in-law passed away. He was still very much in the operator chair, had no plan, and I had to step in and help sell the business in a fire sale. And fortunately, we were able to save those jobs. But the potential financial benefit that could have been a blessing to my family and several other families around there was a lot left on the table there because of lack of planning and preparation there. And again, if not for not just me, like significant effort from a lot of people, like it would have been hard to even just save those jobs. So that was a very real experience that pushed me even more into like, man, this is a real problem. And I don't think that's a isolated case. I think there's a lot of businesses that look and feel like that.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate when you see somebody or a group of somebodies that spend so much time and effort and energy in their life and their blood and sweat and tears. I mean, a business a lot of times ends up being a third member of the family, right? Like
That's right.
just outside the actual blood relatives, and it's to lose them like that when it's so unexpected. I don't think any of us on our best days, maybe we don't, but I think a lot of us ignore the fact that at some point this ends, whether we choose for it to end or it ends
That's
on
right.
accident, it's going to end. And so, like, before we go, there's something I want to go back to, but I'd love to know, like, why do you think people refuse to do succession plan or refuse to think about that? Is that like an ego thing? Like nobody can do this like I can? Is it an effort thing? Like I'm already so busy doing everything else, I don't really care about that, or is it I'm not taking this seriously? Like, or is it something else?
I think the answer is yes, depending on the company, right? I think all those reasons you just described probably represent a lot of the cases out there, but I think
Mm,
it's different for everyone, right? In the case of my father-in-law, I think for a long time it was a little bit of like ego and identity. Like, this is the thing I've done forever. This is who I am. It's my network. It's how I'm known. It's how I engage in the
mm,
world. And that became even more pressing for him because my mother-in-law passed away 10 years before he did. And so he went from this like idea that someday I'll get to retire with her and we're going to have this future that's going to be amazing, to I don't think I ever want to stop working because what else would I do? And that future retirement I had in mind just got imploded, and he was never able to unwind from that. And it's really, I it's hard to blame him. I get it. I love my job and I don't actually plan on retiring myself at any point. So I can totally empathize with that. I think for other owners, it's more of just, I'm so bogged down in the day to day, like the classic work on the business, not in the business. Like very few people have much time to step out and think 5 years out, or even a year out, right? They're just caught up in the firefighting that is small business. Like we talk about in early stage venture, like there are always fires burning, problems to solve. Small business ownership is no better. And in fact, it might be even more challenging because typically you have fewer resources. You are very often living like not paycheck to paycheck, but in a similar way, right? Like many small businesses never get to experience millions of dollars sitting in a bank account where they go, how am I going to invest these dollars in growth? Like they're just sort of like paycheck to paycheck. How am I going to hit my next payroll? And many do grow out of that at some point, and many get pulled back into it. Like it's this roller coaster oftentimes in small business. You're around it. You see it all the time too. So I think the reality is, even if you really wanted to spend time being really thoughtful about a succession plan, it's really challenging to create the time and space to do that. So I think it could be different depending on the different owner, but there's a lot of factors. There's generational stuff, like things like my parents don't talk about money or relationships or politics, or there's just a lot of stuff we don't talk about.
Big
Like,
five. Yeah.
yeah, right. So, and that, so I think there's some generational, like if you think about just the age of the average business owner, that's probably not too different from what I just described. So I think there's a lot of factors involved in it. And that makes it actually a really hard problem to solve, because if I'm not willing to engage in the conversation, even if Fireroad builds an awesome model for how to help transition owners, unless they actually want to have the conversation, I'm not sure how we help them.
Yeah. The identity piece is so key. I was in the Air Force for 4 years to start my career, and my dad was a Air Force guy too, and he did 20 plus years and retired. And I can't tell you how many military members I've known over my life that have done a full career, 20, sometimes 30 years, and it's such a big part of their identity. They go to the
Mm-hmm.
airport, they get, shaking hands and thank you for what you do, and do you
Correct.
want to sit here, and like it that is multiplied out across every aspect of their life, which is great and
And
rightfully
rightfully
so.
so.
All right, 100%. Yeah, 100%. But what's interesting is that it becomes part of their identity, and there's this big crisis of transition post military career where there's a lot of classes that the
Right.
US government tries to put together to help people with that identity shift. And I even experienced this a little bit with my first business, which was a barbecue restaurant. We very aptly named it Lyle's Barbecue Company. So it was like my last name, what we did, and we tried to make some money. So we called it a company. How successful we were is kind of up in the air, but it had my last name on it, which was a huge point of pride for me. And so like we'd wear t-shirts and jackets, and it, be
Mm-hmm.
cool to go somewhere and somebody see that in a grocery store. And then they would come up to me and be like, "Oh, do you work there?" And then I get to say, "No, I own
No,
it." And
no.
that's right. And they're like, "Oh, no way." It's like, that's the best pulled pork sandwich or brisket or saw or whatever they say. And it feels good. And that business crashed because of a whole bunch of other stories that you and I can talk about on part two of this podcast in the future.
Sure.
But, I had a lot of ego and a lot of identity tied up in that business. And so, to
And how
think
many
about
years
it,
did you run it?
only six. And it's
Right.
crazy how
Imagine
tied up I
30
got in that short
years,
time.
right?
I know.
40
Yeah.
years in, right?
Crazy. Yeah. And so I totally get that. But you did say something in there that I was pretty interested in. Something's always on fire, and you and I have been connected on LinkedIn for a while now. And you had this great post the other day about what is it called exactly? I want to get this right.
Fires
A
burning
fire
list.
burning list.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd love for you to unpack a fires burning list, and then we'll go back to some of this other stuff. But this was so good operationally and shows that you have a actual background in being an operator in the space.
Yeah, I think I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure I stole this from Reid Hoffman. He's the founder of
Yep.
LinkedIn, and he's great podcast, and he's written books and some really good stuff there. And so I'm pretty sure I heard it from him, but essentially you get to a point where it's a small team running after all kinds of problems. If by the grace of God you start to figure something out, like, and you build momentum, all of a sudden things don't get easier, they get harder, right? Because now you've got customers and a product and maybe investors, and in every direction you look, there are fires burning and your inclination is to go put them all out. That's real, right? You deal with that as a founder. And I think some founders figure out pretty quickly that one of the most important things for them is like energy management and focus and attention. And so they might start to actually get pretty good at just ignoring a fire over here. But as soon as you hire a team and that team comes on board and you bring them on because they're an expert at something, like Chandler's a badass at sales and marketing, I bring him on to lead sales and marketing. He wants to get it perfect, right? So when you see a fire burning in your lane, you believe it's the most important fire in the company to put out. And so it gets even more challenging when you start to hire below you to manage these fires burnings across the board. And I've just learned over time, if I can go, Chandler, I hear you loud and clear. Look, here's the list of really important stuff we need to figure out at some point. Yours is on here. And this list we're going to revisit as a leadership team every single month. And at some point, it will become the most important thing for us to figure out. And I promise we'll get to it. All that to say, your ideas and thoughts and concerns are not falling on deaf ears. We just can only focus on a few things right now. Here's the ones we're focused on, and here's why. Just that alone, you can almost like feel the like, okay, like a little bit of relief and like, okay, we don't have to do that right now. I know we'll get to it, both from the founders leading and from that team who's like, okay, we've got a space for that. So that becomes really important. And I think there's a separate list I didn't talk about in that post. It's very similar, which is, in the product world, it's more of like an icebox. So if you're building like a software product, it's like features, right? Here are things that at some point we're going to add for our users, but not right now. We can put that in the icebox and go, hey, I heard you, Chandler. That's a great idea. I know our users want it. It's in the icebox. We're going to come back to it. That's different. So that might be like, we're going to add pulled chicken. Like, yeah, we know the customers want pulled chicken in our barbecue shop. We're going to get there, but not yet, right? Like that's a future product we're going to launch. I think having a place to park problems and ideas that you can revisit regularly, reprioritize. So it's like, it's not going to get, because that's part of the problem is if there's an issue or an opportunity and you're not doing anything about it, the cognitive load of like thinking about that every so once in a while, because you don't want to forget it. You're like, I don't want to forget. So you'll kind of bring it back to mind on a regular basis versus if I just have a list where I can park these things, I can release it and let it go. It's similar to like you wake up in the middle of the night with a thing. Like if you can jot down that idea, you can actually get back to sleep, right? Very similar concept to let's get it on a list that we'll revisit and it'll just release the team from it.
Yeah, it was when I read it, I felt seen, I think, because
Mm,
we're running a small startup company and we're getting ready to add employees 5 and 6 probably by the end of the year. So
right.
we're doing really well. Everything's great, but like you said, every employee, every new opportunity, every new thing. Like High Beam just had its biggest year or sorry month ever in the last 2 months back to back. But that like when you think about having those moments of success 2 years ago, it's very exciting because all you get is the reward when you're dreaming about
Right.
it. But now in the moment of like having to think about doing the thing, you're like, oh
Yes.
my gosh, I gotta like this is not just the reward. It's like all the things that have to happen to make sure that keeps going and we keep growing and doing all the things. So I
That's
loved
right.
the list and I like the icebox as well. That's a good thing. Is that like similar to like tech debt? I've heard that analogy in software before where you sort of have like a big backlog of tech debt. Like, hey, we robbed Peter to pay Paul later on,
Yes.
and you got to go back and make do. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
that's
that's probably a
a good
separate
thing.
list usually in software where, that's more owned by product and engineering, which, oftentimes the
Hmm.
product backlog is as well. But yes, that's one of those things where it'll weigh on you as an engineer, right? If you know that the team is building in a way that's not scalable,
Mm, yeah.
documenting that and keeping control of that and having that conversation on a regular basis. Because what I think in all cases, what you're basically doing is you're making intentional decisions to delay doing a thing, right? And if you don't talk about those intentional decisions, they weigh on you. Like there's this leadership principle too. It's a little bit similar, like expectations versus like intentions and agreements. So if I have certain expectations of you as my go to market sales marketing leader, that just I expect someone in this role is going to do these things in this way, but I never actually tell you about those, there's a high likelihood we're going to have misalignment at some point, and maybe often, because I expect you to act a certain way or operate a certain way or handle certain things, and you have different expectations of your role as a leader. And so if we can get out of expectation land and move towards agreements where I go, hey Chandler, here's what I think is actually most important for our company and someone in this role over the next 3 months. And you go, cool, I mostly agree with that, but Tim, I think these are the three things I would push back on, or I don't think that's really all that important. By the time that conversation's done, now we agree upon what we're going to do. And it's a hell of a lot easier for me to hold you accountable and for you to receive a hard conversation later better because you're like, you're right, man. I missed that mark. We agreed on that mark versus I had this unspoken expectation and now I'm going to, call you to the mat on it. And you're like, what the frick,
Mhm.
dude? Well, where'd that come from? We didn't agree to that. Right. So I think it's similar where
Yeah.
we talk about these things. We go, this is a trade-off. We're going to let this fire burn. We're going to inquire. We're going to incur some tech debt for now because
Mhm.
speed is more important. So having a place to and a framework to have those conversations, I think is just really critical.
It's like over communicating is helping build company culture at the end of the day. It's like nobody's at fault for this. We're all aware that it's a problem. And
That's
if it
right.
becomes a bigger problem tomorrow, I'm not going to come over here and say, John, this is your fault. How did you not deal with this? Because we've already all talked about it. We've already
That's right.
prioritized other things over this issue. And a healthy team will come together and say, okay, cool. Now this is now a bigger fire. It's going to burn the whole building down. So let's go ahead and address it now before it becomes a bigger problem. So I love the framework and the environment for communication that simple list creates for problems that every SMB is going to have until the end of time. Even if you get big, it's just your problems get bigger, right?
That's right.
So imagine you've got, we got a lot of SMB owners out there listening, and they're
Sure.
wanting to grow, and they're doing the bootstrapping thing now. They're growing organically, but they're starting to. I've had this conversation with a lot of people, especially in the marketing space. Everybody wants to look at
Yeah.
potentially bringing on a cash infusion to help fuel their marketing efforts, which hopefully will help fuel their cash flow efforts down the road. So, like, I'd love to know from your perspective, from Fireroad's holding company, like,
Sure.
who should look to bring on a business partner like that, and like who shouldn't? Like, who's that for, and who should just continue on down the road? Like, should they have grand ambitions, or like what are your thoughts on that?
Great question. I think it starts with the team around the table because in most categories, you could choose to stay more boutique and small or niche and focus on being excellent and good profit margin, but not necessarily significant scale. And by the way, I would say I'm fairly opinionated in this. Like, I do believe you're either growing or you're dying.
Mm,
So I don't think same level for a decade in a row is super healthy. In fact, I think it's very likely there's something underneath that probably is a bit of a house of cards that
mm,
one person leaves or you lose one customer or whatever. Like, you're on shaky ground. If you're not growing, you're probably, even if it's slowly, dying. And so I would say I think everyone should be challenging themselves to try and continue to grow. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean top line, but in some way, shape, or form, you have to be evolving or someone's going to come eat your lunch. It's just how business, we're in a free market environment. Like, you leave room for someone, they'll come eat it. I promise. Like,
mhm,
so I think we all should be focused on that. But there are some people who are very comfortable with, I don't want a business that is going to scale, let's say like infinitely scale in a way that adds complexity that I just don't want to deal with. There are some owners who are like, I don't want the complexity of 100 employees. I never want that. And maybe we're good with five, right? And let's get to 7 or 8 over the next decade, or the next handful of years. But I don't want to add a 10x, head count because most complexities in business growth are people, right? Like, let's be real. Managing people is the biggest part of complexity as you scale a business. And I completely understand why many people are not suited for that, don't want that. So if you have a leadership team, however, that says, we believe we can be a leader in our region, in our community, in our market, in our niche, and we want to actually go do that. And they've figured out, how to make a really good chocolate chip cookie, how to make the product. We know whether it's a product or a service, like we've figured out we've got something uniquely better than most of the market. our challenge is not how do we solve the problem or make the cookie. Our challenge is how do we get it in more people's hand. I think that's a time to consider, do we want to bring in outside capital to scale that? Scaling that might be because we're going to start doing M&A. There's other chocolate chip cookie makers out there that, have an okay recipe, but we're going to use their equipment and their space to make more of our recipe, right? That's going to help us scale more quickly. They've got distribution in certain stores that we're going to sell through way more cookies if we get in those stores because we know our cookies better, right? So it's like there's a chance to grow inorganically in our category. That might require a partner and some capital to go do that. Or we just need to hire a really great distribution person who has relationships in those stores we want to sell our cookies in, right? So I need to go hire the Chandler of the cookie industry who's got all the right connections. He's going to come in and kick butt for us, but he's going to be expensive, and we're going to have to front load some of that expense. And maybe we don't have, enough margin or money in the bank to do that. I think those are places. Or, I am a really strong, visionary entrepreneur, owner, leader. I'm not a great operator. And despite myself, we've gotten to a certain level, but there's a ceiling. Left to my own devices, I'm never going to bust through this ceiling because the complexity of operations will outpace my ability as a leader. I'm going to have to go find a really strong number two. There are very few small businesses that, without outside capital or help, can hire like a really badass number two that comes in from the outside into your small business and goes, great, let's go build a category killer here, right? So those are some examples of places where I would go, it might make sense to look at taking on some debt or financial investment and or a partner to help you in those things.
Yeah, I resonate with that. My first business, the barbecue restaurant, was with my mom and dad, right? It's who you know. And so it's like, hey, we're
Mm-hmm.
all friends and we're family essentially. Like let's build a business together. And we didn't ever stop and think about none of us have more or less money than the others within a certain range. And then also we're all pretty much the same people because we're related and we're
Yeah,
like very
pretty
closely
similar skill
related.
sets,
So
and
we're very similar skill set. And so
yeah,
the business grew, like you said, in spite of our best efforts for 6 years.
yeah,
And it was only after it crashed and I had 2 years away from the entrepreneurship game to reflect that I went like, oh, I was missing an operations person. Like that was the big
mm,
hole. And like I'm like you, I'm very much so on the scale of, visionary or operator. Like I tend to be over here on the I like 5 to 10 year windows. Like if I could live in the clouds, I would. And so this time when I started this business, I said, fool me once, not going to do it twice. So my
right,
my two partners are both like one's like kind of in the middle of the road and the other one like might as well be as far opposite operations wise than I am. And as frustrating as those conversations are with him, sometimes because we're so different, I'm so
yeah,
grateful for them because I know what he's bringing to the table versus like what I bring to the table. And so as long as you have a healthy respect for each other, it's great.
yeah,
But that kind of takes us to an interesting other place where it's like money is money and you can almost get money in a bunch of different ways. And there's a bunch of investors out there or holding companies or whomever. And so I'd love to know your thoughts as somebody who's been on both the operating side of the fence and is now on the holding company and even VC
yeah.
side of the fence. Like, what should we be looking for beyond money to ensure that we have a successful relationship with this new investor in our business?
I think it's missional alignment. Like
Hmm.
what you have to look at where the capital comes from your investor, I think first and foremost. So am I taking capital from a fund, a private equity fund that has LPs that have been promised a 5 to 7 year return of their capital with a multiple? Like, if so, that will dictate how I operate as an investor. And it doesn't make me a big, bad, evil Wall Street investor if that's true. But my job is to return their capital in a 5 year window ish so that I can go raise another fund and do it again. Right. And so
Mm.
knowing where the capital comes from and the goals behind that, right? So who are the investors and what do they care about? What are they interested in? That will help inform what how that investor is likely to operate. So I think that's one step. One is like, what's the long-term vision of the investor that we're taking on? Who are the people around the table? The second, I think, is just track record. Like, go, it's really easy for me to put on a good face in a meeting and tell you about how great we are. And, even when stuff gets hard, I'm going to be there for you and support you. we don't actually know how someone's truly going to act until you're in the trenches and the plan goes wrong, right? The market flips, you lose that key customer, margin gets squeezed somehow. Like you're all of a sudden went from things are great and this is an awesome business to we're fighting for our lives in this thing. That's when I'll learn what Chandlers really like to work with. And so I'm a huge fan of like go talk to people who've worked with these investors before and ask them what they're like. Like don't just look at the glowing success cases, the ones that went really well. Like see if you can find some dogs because almost every investor has them. Like we're all going to make mistakes and be wrong about some of our bets. Like go talk to the ones where it didn't go well and ask how they operated in those moments. I think that will help inform what that investor is going to be like as a true partner, not just their capital, but what are they going to be like to operate with when times get tough. And then I think maybe if I backed up and said like where I would start is I would just have a candid conversation with any investor about my goals. It's like, what do I want out of this? What am I trying to get out of this? Like, if I come in and I'm really clear that I want to be the operator running this business for 20 more years, or if I'm like, hey, Chandler, I want out in the next 3 years and I hope to have a significant financial exit, or I don't care about a financial exit. I just want my time back and I can keep my equity in the business and go for a ride. Like, talking about things like what are you trying to get out of this from your time and from your dollars, like personally as an owner, what do you want from this transaction, not just in year one but in the next 5 and 10 years. If I start with that really clearly and honestly, hopefully at least some number of investors will self-select in and out based on those goals, right? Like, hey, that's not going to be in alignment with our fund dynamics or with our investors behind us or with what we're looking for from a portfolio standpoint.
Mm, that's good. In that same vein, when investors do get brought on, like let's say the owners decide like, oh, this person does bring not only capital, but the other things that we're looking for as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now all of a sudden this is a big change for the organization. And some of these businesses may be 10 or 50 employees, but there's some size
Yeah.
team there. And generally there's leaders of leaders inside of the building. And so this is why change management is such a big, highly compensated role, right? But what kind of effects, both positive and negative, have you seen investors have on companies' culture? And like, what are some of the things we can do as small business owners to make sure that that time of change is handled as well as possible?
I think it starts with just transparency and communication. So, what many people will want to say is things are not going to change. Like it's back to business as usual, right? Like no changes. Like, well, that's probably BS. Like you're not bringing on an investor to come alongside you to operate business as usual. Like there's going to
Yeah.
be some change. That doesn't mean your job's on the line, but it could. It could very well mean like this company is going to grow in a significant way and it might outgrow you. That's one of the hardest conversations to have as an owner, as an investor, as anyone. It's like you've got these
Yeah.
people that are awesome who've been with you for a long time. They may need to transition to a different role where you're hiring above them. They may even need to transition out of the business. So what I never want to do as an investor or partner is come in and say, everyone's job's safe, nothing's going to change, we've got you. And then, 6 months, stuff happens that's far outside of your control. And all of a sudden you're doing a reduction in force or laying someone like,
Mhm.
you just
Yeah.
never want to put on a good face and tell a good story just to make things easier in that transition. You want to be as transparent as possible. And like, there are many things you won't know. Like, we just won't know certain things, right, about how this company is going to evolve. But there's certain things we will know. Like, hey, this is not going to change. These things are staying the same. We expect no changes in this category. Here's why. Here's some stuff we're not sure about. We're still figuring. I think just being transparent about here's why we brought in the partner. Here's why we think they are the right partner. Here are the things we expect to change and where we're going over the next 5 years. I think just be transparent with people about that up front to the extent you can and try and continue to do that as you learn more and the business evolves and unfolds. And some things you will have gotten right, some things you will not have. Just keep being transparent about that stuff as you go.
Mm.
I think that's the most important thing is let's be transparent. Let's continue to focus on building into our team and leveling them up and giving them a chance to grow with the business. It won't always work, but let's give them a fighting chance
Mm,
to grow and level up with the company as we do.
that's right. If you have a fear of being transparent with people at a healthy level, then you probably have the wrong people to begin with, and no amount of transparency or secrecy is going to save your company culture anyways. And all
Correct.
this money and new activity is just going to back to the fires burning list we talked about earlier. All those fires are just going to,
It
like, you
exacerbates
basically
it.
just threw
Yeah.
gasoline on them. Because to your point earlier, it is people that will help you grow your business. I mean, that is like single-handedly the biggest thing I underestimated early on in my career. I started my first business when I was 24, and I just really underestimated how important having the right people around you are for your business success in general. And
Yeah.
that it seems like what you're saying is that's important all the way from the ownership level for sure, but also the investor level, and then leaders on the team, the actual doers of the thing on the team, and then all the way down. I love that. That's great. So transitioning to the deal is done, right? It's kind of like a marriage, right? We dated for a while, we've seen financials, we've really gotten in the nitty gritty. If we've done it well, we've had a lot of awkward conversations about, how do we do this in this situation? What do we do in this situation? And I'm sure you know all about that.
Sure.
But now the deal's done, the money's sent, we're moving on. Next thing, what can we do as business owners? And then what do you guys do at Fire Road to make sure that owners and holding companies or partners they stay in alignment to all those dreams they had before the quote unquote wedding happened? It's kind of like a wedding, right? Where you get married and now all of
Hmm.
a sudden it's like, do we keep dating? Do we keep communicating? Like, what's the secret to success for the next 10 years or until exit happens?
To us, the best place to start is before the deal is closed. It's like, let's date to some extent before we get married. Meaning, like, if we say we're going to add value as you know, in a CFO type function or in a CTO type, if we're going to help you figure out technology or process or systems that are going to enable growth, like, why don't we start working on that while we're trying to get the deal done as well? Worst case
Mm,
scenario, you'll have a better business and you'll respect me because I've come alongside you and I've helped you, even if it falls apart, which can be ugly and messy and like hurtful. If it falls apart, but you walk away with some value out of it, it's going to make the thing a little bit better, right? For all parties.
mhm,
We're going to feel better about it because we feel like we've left you with a better business in either situation. And on the other side of it, if we get it done, like, we're already running pretty hard, right? Like, we've already started to find ways we can add value, and we're actually helping you with those things already. And so we know right where to start on day one. It's just a matter of how do we lean into that a little bit more and start to bring more of the team into that conversation, because it's probably a smaller room of people who've been kind of privy to the deal to date. Now we can just start to add value across more of the organization, ideally. But I think we figured out those places we're going to add value as a partner for you up front. There are definitely some partners who it's mostly about capital. Like, we're just, you're going to get a wire when this thing's done, and it'll enable you to hire the people you've been wanting to hire or to invest in marketing and sales. That's not Fireroad. We're not just a financial partner. Like, we want to work with companies that we believe we can help them. We want to be like their cheat code, right? Not just their capital. It's like, man, we're going to help unlock you because you get a team of people who have been in the trenches and have done the thing you're trying to do, or gone through this stage, or know this market, or whatever it is. There's some really critical piece that we're going to bring to the organization. But we've talked about that for months, way before the deal is done. Now it's just time to execute, right? Now it's time to put our money where our mouth is, put our time where our mouth is, and actually show up and help you. I think the thing to be really careful about in that phase is remembering, even if we just invested in a way where we now have a control of your business from an ownership stake, we are not controlling your business from a day to day. Like, we're not running your company. So we're coming alongside you. We might now own more than 50% of your business, but we're investing because we believe in Chandler. Like, we want to help you take this thing to the next level. So we've got to remember, on the other side of a deal, like, it's still Chandler's company to run. I'm going to come alongside and augment him in the ways that we've agreed to. And I want to be a great partner. And of course, I'm going to challenge him and push him on certain things, but I'm not coming in to replace you or to change how you operate or to force you into certain. It's like, no, I'm coming along to be your partner, and I'm going to augment you in the areas you need help.
mm, that's good. And it kind of it comes full circle here to where I was going to start the interview, but then, we got down a tangent, but I'm glad we ended up back here. It's a very full circle moment. I want to talk about Fire Road's mission, and I wrote it down here, so I want to make sure I get this right. And here it is. It's Fire Road's mission is to cultivate entrepreneurship as a force for good in the world. And I would love for you to end today's conversation with that. Like, just unpack that. Where does that come from? What's the spirit behind that? Why do you choose that in a world where business is tough? We see that the majority of businesses don't make it 5 years. You've already laid out that the majority of businesses won't have a successful transition at the end outside of a
Right.
fire road or a fire sale, asset sale kind of thing. Why are you doubling down there when the market is going a different way?
I think it's because I realized as an entrepreneur myself 5, 10 years ago, somewhere in that time frame, somewhere between 5 and 10 years ago, like, so what, let me rewind. Coming out of college, I was first generation college student, grew up with a kind of lower middle income family. We weren't poor by any stretch of the imagination, but I knew we struggled with finances, and I wondered how the hell are my parents going to pay for college? How am I going to pay for college being a first gen? Like, I wondered about these things. Now, fortunately, by the grace of God, I got a scholarship, and that covered, my tuition, which is great, and meant I didn't have to have a ton of student debt. But a lot of that, I share all that to say I was very financially driven coming out of school. It was like, I want to make it. I want to make a ton of money. I want to not have to worry about these things. Like, I want to make a lot of money, and I want to like change the world through entrepreneurship. I want to solve big problems, and uh, I still want to make a bunch of money. That'd be great. It'd be awesome, and I still want to solve big problems. These are all things I still care about these things, but I realized between 5 and 10 years ago, the opportunity for impact through entrepreneurship starts with just creating one great job. Like, if I can help put Chandler in a position to use his God-given talents to do really good work in a place where he knows he's cared about, like beyond the value he brings to the company, he knows that the human beings around him actually care about him and want him to do well and want him to thrive as a father and a husband and a community member and have hobbies outside of work. If you believe those things and you get to do work that's aligned with your talents and skills, you come alive. Like, I've seen it time and time again. If I can put someone in that kind of position, they're awesome employees first and foremost. They're pretty dang loyal also, and they have so much more impact outside of work. And that was an unintended consequence for me that I just started to notice, about a decade ago. Like, holy cow, you're a better parent now. Like, you are involved in a nonprofit that you weren't involved in, or you picked up that hobby and joined a band again, and you haven't done that in forever, and you've been grinding so hard trying to make it so that someday you could be in a band, like, and I'm like, why don't you do that now? Like, why are you grinding so hard? Right. So it was just really exciting to me when I saw the unlock of just one great job. And so we believe if you want to flip families in towns and communities and cities, and who knows, maybe this country, become an amazing employer that creates awesome jobs, that helps people come alive. And those people will have massive impact, both financially, because you're going to treat them well and take care of them. And the company hopefully will make money. So you, as an owner operator, can have more resources to deploy into. But let's do that with the intention of lifting up communities and families and people around us, both directly through employment and through our financial resources. So that we just think the potential to impact community and culture through entrepreneurship is immense if we focus on the human side of the business, not just the financial side. And so that's the kind of impact we hope to have through Fireroad across the entire platform.
Mm. Man, that's about as good a way as we can end this conversation as
Mm.
possible. So I got a lot more I want to ask you, but we'll save it for a couple months and we'll do a
Round
part two.
two
How's that sound?
in real
That's
life.
right.
Looking forward
In
to
real life. Yep. Yep. We'll,
it.
we'll sync up here in the great city of Cincinnati. And if you've never been here, you got to come check it out because,
Great town.
like Tim mentioned, it's a cool town. Nobody knows about it. And I believe we were talking about this 10 years ago. Cincinnati was in a totally different place. 20 years ago, it was in an
Yes.
unrecognizable place, which were your words. And I think 10 years from now, because of people like you and the work you're doing here and building a community where people like me can come in and continue to operate our businesses, it's going to be a incredible place for entrepreneurs to be. And I'm really excited
Yes.
about it. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for your time. This hour has been amazing. I know that everybody out there is going to really enjoy this episode. We're going to link up your LinkedIn for everybody to connect with you, and then also put Fireroad's website into the show notes so everybody can
Great.
check you guys out. And Tim, is there anybody that you'd like to reach out, or is there any ask, anything we can do to help you before we let you go today?
We love meeting business owners, so we're trying to acquire great small businesses. Call it in the $10 million to $15 million in revenue range, like kind of roughly. Service focused, human centered businesses. As of this point, right now, we're still raising our venture fund. If you're interested in being a part of building the most helpful early stage venture fund in the Midwest, I'd love to chat.
I love that. All right, well, we'll put it out there, man, and
Awesome.
it's gonna be fun to watch your journey over the next decade, man. This is cool. I'm
Thanks,
excited for
Chandler.
connecting
Great
now.
to be connected,
We
man.
appreciate everybody out there listening, everybody watching. This is great. This is a great community. See you next time.